All right, for my final paper, since I was restricted to 12 pages, I left my personal experience out and focused on the purely academic understanding of how Baha'is can facilitate healing in those who have experienced trauma. However, today I would like to share my personal journey as a Baha'i with post-traumatic stress disorder and how it brings the science and theology of trauma to life for me. I am hoping this format can really highlight the difference you can make in someone's life with a few words or a simple gesture. I also think that putting yourself in the shoes of someone with PTSD briefly and understanding what they feel, although painful, can be very helpful in developing solutions. Throughout the presentation, I will be highlighting the key points I want to draw out of each part of my experience on the PowerPoint slides to help keep us focused on learning and solutions and avoid getting lost in the story. When people hear that I was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 13, they assume that I was severely abused by my parents or another relative and that my entire childhood was terrible. The opposite is in fact true. Until the age of 12, I enjoyed an ideal childhood, and I mistakenly assumed everyone else in the world experienced the same. I looked up to my loving and happily married parents and aspired to have a life as perfect and beautiful as theirs. They both flourished in well-paying careers and always had plenty of time for me as well as for each other. We lived in a small town in Maine, and I had many cousins and friends who lived within walking distance. I enjoyed all aspects of life to the fullest extent. I excelled socially, academically, and athletically, and I had planned to become the first woman president. Shortly before my 13th birthday, the brutal murder of my best friend tore my perfect world asunder. In addition, her murderer remained unpunished due to a technicality. Then, less than a year later, before I recovered from that tragedy, I was raped by an adult male at a sleepover. Unfortunately, my suffering had only begun, and having never experienced even mild trauma before, I had no coping strategies to draw on. I do not have any memory of the rape itself or even how I got home afterwards. I experienced complete amnesia of the trauma, which is a common symptom of PTSD. My first clear memory afterwards is a phone call from one of my friends who was not at the sleepover. He had heard I had left early and was concerned if something had happened. Other friends at the party said I was acting weird. I told him I thought that one of the adults there had raped me, but I was not sure because I could not remember. Anyway, I told him I really want to take a shower. I feel gross. And then sleep. I haven't slept, or at least I do not think I have slept. I did not feel traumatized at the time, just in need of sleep and a shower. This amnesia and confusion post-trauma is really common. Often the person feels quite normal initially because they are in shock. Do not assume that this means they do not need your support. While I was in the shower, my mom rushed in and told me we needed to go to the hospital. I told her I was not hurt and I was tired, but she insisted. My friend had called to tell her what had happened. At the hospital, a rape kit was done. I was given the morning after pill, several shots to minimize the chances of me acquiring an STD, and I was sent on my way. No compassion. Not one nurse looked at me or asked if I needed anything. Everyone was too busy making sure evidence was gathered and pregnancy was prevented. Unfortunately, this is a common occurrence. Because medical and legal teams see trauma so often, they become numb to it and simply focus on physical injuries and evidence in order to protect themselves. So do not assume that the hospital will provide emotional support or refer the individual to therapy if they need it. This may be something the Baha'i community may need to do, even though it seems out of our scope. Victims are not being properly supported and directed elsewhere. Someone has to step up. My parents, lost in their own pain, though they did all they could to protect me, were unable to look at me for years afterwards. They hired the best lawyer to make sure that he was punished to the full extent of the law. They wanted to make sure there were no technicalities this time. When I said I was too scared to go to school, they hired a private tutor to take over my education. When I was ready to return to school, they moved so I could go to a better school. And they paid for years of therapy. When one therapist could not fix me, they sent me to another. However, what I really needed more than anything was for them to hold me and tell me everything would be okay. Their inability to look at me only served to reinforce my assumption that something was wrong with me. A community that supported and showed compassion to not only me, but my parents at this point could have prevented years of misery for all of us. Helping with meals, childcare, and cleaning, just being there, can be a light in the darkness to families. Many worry they don't know the right words to say to a family that is grieving post-trauma. The truth is there are no right words. Nothing you say will make it better. But you being present, letting them know that you love them and don't see them as broken, will make a difference, even if it doesn't seem like it at the time. A few weeks later, I went to church for the first time. The other kids that I had gone to Sunday school with for years cornered me and told me I was not welcome. They said I was so dirty that even Jesus could not cleanse me of my sins and save me from hell. Even today, I feel unwelcome inside churches. That Sunday school group was my last hope for any support. My parents were too consumed by their own grief to comfort me. We had moved a 30-minute drive away so that I could go to a better school, but that left me without anyone I knew at school, and I was unable to walk to my friends' or cousins' houses as I had once been. Now I was no longer welcome at Sunday school, where all were supposed to be welcomed and loved. I realized in that moment that I was truly alone, and that no one, not even God, would ever love me again. That night, rather than the night immediately following the trauma, was when the flashbacks and crippling anxiety started. In most cases, all the symptoms of PTSD do not begin immediately following the trauma. Often there's a second event, like this one, that precipitates the full onslaught of symptoms. The wrong words, or even body language, from those we care about, can cause our minds to give into the darkness. Numerous studies have shown that trauma, no matter how terrible, is only followed by PTSD when our communities do not support us post-trauma. Baha'i communities can provide this support just by realizing it is necessary. Post-trauma, everyone needs to renew their sense of safety and security in the world. They need a safe haven, and Baha'i events, with their focus on unity and love, are perfect for this already. But we must recognize how crucial a role this island of safety is post-trauma. If victims stop coming to events after a trauma, reach out and see if they would prefer a smaller devotional. A large gathering may be too much for them to handle right now, but they need connection, whether they realize it or not. Isolation will quickly worsen PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. At the time of my diagnosis, the standard treatment for PTSD was medication, hypnotherapy, and exposure therapy. Several of my therapists went to great lengths to try and force me to remember the trauma. I would remember it in nightmares and sometimes in hypnotherapy, but as soon as I was awake and conscious, I forgot again. Well, under hypnosis, I would describe what happened to the therapist in a session. Then the therapist would bring me out of hypnosis and tell me what I had told her. Eventually, I was able to memorize what happened so I could successfully pretend to remember. This allowed me to satisfy my therapists, who believed being able to remember was the key to healing, and also enabled me to testify in court. The criteria for PTSD are quite narrow. After 3 years, I no longer met the criteria for PTSD and was dismissed from therapy as successfully cured. To my therapist's credit, I was able to appear normal and to excel in school again. I was a straight A student and one of the top runners in cross country. On the outside, I was successful and no longer affected by my past. On the inside, however, I felt nothing. I could not connect with friends or boyfriends. I faked every emotion I was supposed to feel. I became an amazing actress for my parents and friends. I displayed whatever emotion was necessary to manipulate those around me into thinking I was perfect and wonderful. They all believed the lie. Only I knew the truth. And although I appeared to have many friends, none of those friends knew the truth. None of them knew the real me. So I remained always alone. This is common in those with PTSD and many other mental disorders. They feel they are the only ones suffering with this mental illness. So they work hard to cover up their symptoms and act normal, going so far as to even fool themselves for a bit sometimes. But the darkness ignored always returns. Oh, I think actually, yeah, I skipped a slide. Okay. After high school, I moved to Virginia to attend a small all-woman private university for college. I believed that by surrounding myself with females, I could avoid the danger of males. My PTSD symptoms may have resolved, but trauma continued to make my choices for me. In my second year of college, I had a near-death experience. During a lab experiment in which I was electrocuted, my heart stopped for only 1 minute, but that minute profoundly and permanently altered my worldview. Without warning, I was suddenly thrown into what felt like a hot tub of love. After 6 years without feeling any emotion, serenity filled every cell of my being, as a feeling of being totally and completely loved washed over me. Suddenly, everything made sense. I understood why suffering was necessary and how it could benefit the soul. I understood the purpose of life. Then I returned to my body just as suddenly as I had left it. I felt disoriented and confused. What had just happened? Was it real or a dream? As soon as I asked the question, I knew the answer. Whatever anyone else said or believed, that experience was more real to me than any other experience I've ever had or will have. And I needed to know more. I needed to feel more. Unfortunately, upon returning to my body, the numbness returned, and now it felt heavy. I longed to feel again. For years after my near-death experience, my appetite for religious and theological understanding remained insatiable. I read hundreds of books on the afterlife, near-death experiences, reality, God, and the purpose of life. Everything from the sacred texts of many religions to autobiographies. I was most inspired by the Baha'i writings. Their description of spiritual qualities and how they can be developed through practice or through life's test helped me to understand how I can use the trauma of my past to become more compassionate. My suffering can motivate me to help others. In addition, I was comforted by Shoghi Effendi's assurance that no matter how severe our mental afflictions, our spirit is healthy, near to our beloved, and will in the next world enjoy a happy and normal state. I joined a local Baha'i community and threw myself into various service projects they were involved in. Whenever I was helping others, I started to feel alive again. Some of that serenity I experienced during my near-death experience returned. Helping others really does uplift your spirit, as the writings tell us. Yet anytime I was alone, the numbness set in again. One of the local Baha'is, Karen, a chiropractor, invited me to her office. She explained that she did an alternative form of chiropractic that helped the mind process emotions. I asked why she thought I needed that. She said everyone needs it because everyone has experienced trauma, and when we do, a part of us shuts down. She explained that her technique helps bring those parts of the mind that have been shut down by trauma back online. I was shocked. Everyone has experienced trauma? I am ashamed to admit it, but at that moment, it had never occurred to me that anyone else felt the numbness, the emptiness that pervaded my existence. I always assumed it was just me that was broken. I scheduled an appointment for the next day. As I mentioned before, PTSD does not only makes you feel broken, but it also makes you feel like you were the only one that's broken, which can be incredibly isolating. Being open about trauma and acknowledging its pernicious influence in Baha'i communities is essential. Knowing that trauma can play these tricks on your mind can help mitigate its influence. The technique Karen used is called bioenergetic synchronization technique. She also offered group workshops where participants could support each other in their healing journey. At these workshops, I was surprised by how many of the other participants described experiences that resembled my own. The details and type of trauma would vary, but the effects of the trauma were remarkably similar. Many felt increased anxiety and intensity of emotion for a few years after the trauma, and then they went numb, just as I had. They described a lack of ability to connect with others. Everything felt far away, like watching a movie. All emotions were dulled to the point of near non-existence. Many of them expressed a belief that they were unique. They believed everyone else felt emotion fully and only they were broken. Hearing their comments for the first time in 6 years, I realized I was not alone. The bioenergetic synchronization technique and group workshops not only brought back my ability to feel emotion, but also gave me a community I could rely on. At the same time, I continued to be active in the Baha'i faith and found many friends in the Baha'i community. In addition, Karen became my spiritual mother, frequently inviting me over for dinner, usually delicious Persian food. There were many Baha'i feasts at her house, filled with love and laughter. My healing did not occur overnight. There were many setbacks and challenges along the way. However, Karen, the other participants in the group workshops, and the Baha'i community made me feel human again and facilitated my journey of healing. Feeling like you are human and a part of a community that accepts you is an essential step in the healing process. Throughout my life, many adults in my life conveyed the belief that mental struggles like PTSD could only be helped by professionals. However, in my experience, professionals can only help you function again. They cannot make you feel alive again. For that, community is needed. In addition, many people I have mentioned my traumas to over the years assume that the death of my friend and or the rape were the sole cause of my PTSD. Others have suggested that I am weak or in some way defective, and that is why I developed PTSD. Yet it seems to me that the way my community responded after my trauma, the lack of anyone to connect with or talk to afterwards, caused more harm than the actual traumatic events themselves. The comments made by the Sunday school group were particularly damaging. A year ago, a Baha'i friend made a comment about not inviting traumatized children into her children's classes because she felt they were too damaged to obtain any benefit from the classes. Instead, she referred them to professionals. My heart shattered at these words. I felt like I was 13 again, now being rejected by the faith that had once been a source of healing. The worst part is I could not speak. I could not express the pain these words caused me. That friend still has no idea the impact her words had on me or the children she has labeled as broken. I have come a long way in my healing journey, but my healing is not yet complete. There's work to be done both on myself and in the world. The world needs to know that trauma, although painful, does not have to destroy a person. Everyone can heal and contribute to society if given the opportunity. However, as a society, particularly as a Baha'i community, we must provide that opportunity. We cannot expect parents to handle their traumatized children alone, as my parents were expected to, or for professionals to fix those with mental illness, independent of their social context. The Baha'i community must find ways to support those facing trauma and facilitate their healing journey. Throughout my story, I highlighted some key features of PTSD at the individual level. Now I would like to discuss trauma and PTSD more generally to give you a better understanding of their insidious influence on our lives and minds. Baha'u'llah's writings frequently express his discontent with the state of the world. Discord and malice are apparent everywhere, though all were made for harmony and union. Justice is, in this day, bewailing its plight, and equity groaneth beneath the yoke of oppression. The thick clouds of tyranny have darkened the face of the earth and enveloped its peoples. In several of his prayers, Baha'u'llah describes his heart as melting, and his soul is laden with anguish over the sorrows of the world. The atrocities to which he refers have left countless individuals traumatized in a variety of ways. Yet throughout his writings, Baha'u'llah calls on us to be as a lamp unto them that walk in darkness, a joy to the sorrowful, a sea for the thirsty, a haven for the distressed, and a defender of the victim of oppression. How can Baha'i communities support and uplift the growing number of victims in their community who are so lost in the darkness of their trauma they cannot speak of it? In the next part of this presentation, I will integrate the latest scientific research concerning post-traumatic stress disorder, together with insights from Baha'i scholars and Baha'i writings, to yield methods that Baha'i communities can implement in order to facilitate the healing process in those impacted by trauma, and even to reduce the enervating impacts of future traumas. I will begin with an overview of the impacts of PTSD on our lives before moving into the specific effects on the brain. Later, I will apply this information to ways Baha'i communities can respond. In 2018, the World Mental Health Survey, the largest study ever conducted on PTSD, drawing data from the experiences of 125,000 individuals residing in 26 different countries, yielded a startling insight. Wealth, education, and male gender only impact the type of trauma we will experience. These privileges do not significantly reduce one's overall risk of trauma, as one may assume. In addition, over 70% of us have experienced at least one significant life trauma, which we can recall immediately. And the majority of us have survived more than 3 major traumas. We are all human, and therefore we are all vulnerable. The universality of trauma compels us to seek methods of building resilience. Research consistently affirms that the most important factor in how victims will cope following trauma is their level of social support. Unfortunately, isolation from the COVID-19 pandemic and working in data-driven environments that alienate employees have diminished our ability to defend ourselves against the effects of trauma. Recent research shows the prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder in high-income countries is more than double the prevalence in low-income countries. Chronic stress and a lack of supportive relationships exhaust us and leave us without the resources necessary to cope with traumatic experiences. Our corporate society, by valuing profit more than human life, separates us from our strongest buffer against traumatic experiences, each other. Previous research has demonstrated that interventions delivered immediately after trauma are ineffective. However, social support and a reduction of other life stresses in the weeks after the trauma can lower the risk of developing PTSD. This is a key area of opportunity. We cannot prevent trauma, but we can facilitate the healing process by providing sufficient social support. Now that I have discussed the impacts of trauma on our lives at the visible level, I would like to briefly summarize the influence of trauma on our brain chemistry and function. During trauma, the sympathetic nervous system, also known as the fight or flight system, works with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis to enhance the memory of the event. So that way we can learn from it and avoid future similar instances of trauma, or at least respond more effectively. Serotonin, a brain hormone, also plays a significant role in regulating the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis activity. In cases of extended trauma, cortisol, the stress hormone, also rises to shut off the sympathetic nervous system and provide fuel to the muscles as needed. After the trauma has passed, the prefrontal cortex, also known as the thinking brain, ordinarily helps calm the amygdala down. In PTSD, however, the ability of the prefrontal cortex to do this may be compromised, possibly due to too little dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. Functional neuroimaging reveals several key distinctive features of the brains of individuals with PTSD. Increased activity in the amygdala and decreased activity in the hippocampus and parts of the prefrontal cortex. It appears that the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex are not able to inhibit the amygdala as they would in a non-PTSD brain. So the fear response is overactive, and the amygdala repeatedly triggers nightmares and flashbacks of the trauma. In addition, people with PTSD also have overactive sympathetic nervous systems, possibly due to their lower levels of cortisol. Moreover, people with PTSD have decreased response to serotonin, leading to aggression, depression, and hyperactivity distress. A key hormone in the calming of the stress system after trauma is oxytocin. Together with dopamine and other hormones, oxytocin allows us to feel safe and loved, to love others, and to experience bonds of attachment. This is also the hormone that allows us to feel connected to God. Post-trauma, sufficient oxytocin is essential in order to restore a patient's trust in others and in the world. Unfortunately, victims of rape and physical assault, because they are frightened of people post-trauma, often do not experience oxytocin-stimulating activities after trauma, such as hand-holding, hugs, petting animals, eye contact. Instead, victims are often subjected to physical examinations, courtroom interrogations, and ridicule from others, as I was. These experiences further depress production of oxytocin. Being treated distantly and coldly post-trauma not only feels terrible, but it also worsens the imbalances in our brain chemistry. Although our understanding of the influence of trauma on the brain is fairly clear, those working in mental health fields still lack a consistent way to alleviate these effects. Paradoxically, the more treatment one is given for PTSD, often the worse the patient becomes. Methods that should help, in theory, don't. For example, no medication consistently improves this condition long-term, and intensive inpatient care worsens most patients' symptoms. Even self-help groups, rather than being productive, often deteriorate into scapegoating in the development of a strong us versus them identity, which can worsen mental health. When providers isolate people from their support systems and encourage them to rely on medication or therapy for healing, study after study shows that patients deteriorate. System supports heal us more than any treatment. Therapists cannot connect with us like our friends and family can. They cannot provide a two-way relationship, a true connection, which is what we need more than anything when we are drowning alone in our trauma. So many trauma victims give up because they do not have the support they need, and a professional who is paid to listen to you cannot provide this support. In addition to the failure of many professional treatments to help, many groups and individuals blame victims and exclude them as a way of maintaining their personal invulnerability. People want to believe that trauma cannot happen to them, so they label the victim as defective in some way in order to separate themselves from the victim and feel safe. This is often done completely subconsciously. In this situation, the victim both loses a support system and in their vulnerable state may adopt the labels that the group has placed on them. The reaction from these groups and individuals can often cause more harm than the original traumatic experience. For example, years after the Sunday school group ridiculed me, I believed God did not love me and that I was damaged beyond repair. This desperation to maintain personal invulnerability, to believe we are safe from trauma, also prevents individuals from seeking ways of building resilience to trauma. We all want to believe trauma will not happen to us, so we see no need to seek ways of learning to overcome trauma before it happens. As a parent, I want to believe that things will be different for my daughter and that she will not suffer the way that I have. I wish that I could protect her from ever being raped or ever losing a loved one to violence. But the fact is, these things may happen to her no matter what I do. My parents certainly never wanted my traumatic experiences to happen to me and did their best to provide me with everything I needed. But the truth is, trauma happens. If these traumas don't occur, other traumas will. At some point in the future, someone or something will hurt my precious little girl. The only way things can be different for her is if I recognize that reality and if I do everything I can to help her build resilience and learn coping strategies. As a Baha'i community, we need to teach the next generation how to cope and how to strengthen themselves so that when, not if, trauma happens to them, it only sets them back a bit and does not completely destroy them. Trauma pervades our existence. Despite our growing awareness and understanding of its pernicious influence, Both professionals and communities continue to fail to alleviate the impacts of trauma for most individuals. Yet the Baha'i writings maintain hope that a world with less suffering can exist. Abdu'l-Baha says, if action took the place of words, the world's misery would very soon be changed into comfort. What action can Baha'i communities take to bring this world of comfort into fruition? How can we bring healing to those who are simultaneously desperately in need of connection and lack sufficient serotonin and oxytocin to form connections with others? What can ordinary people do when experts in trauma struggle to find solutions? As I mentioned before, many Baha'is struggle with these questions and believe they cannot help someone who has experienced trauma because they are not an expert. However, this notion is misguided. As discussed previously, our support system post-trauma influences our susceptibility to PTSD far more than any treatment. Communities, whether they realize it or not, determine our ability to cope. Therapy can help, but alone it is not enough. The first step for Baha'i communities is to recognize and embrace this power. By familiarizing ourselves with the science and integrating that science with Baha'i teachings, we can engender a supportive environment where individuals can build resilience to future traumas and heal from past traumas. The brief overview of PTSD I've already given here yields numerous avenues for Baha'i communities to uplift those suffering from the impacts of trauma. For example, by recognizing and resisting our natural instinct to believe a person's trauma could not happen to us, we prevent ourselves from contributing to the victim's self-blame. By withholding judgment and instead offering love and acceptance, we significantly increase the chances that the victim will recover. This does not require words. In fact, actions often speak louder than words post-trauma. Inviting the individual to community activities that naturally increase oxytocin and serotonin heal more than any other form of consolation. These activities can include group hikes, nature walks, days at the beach, or ropes courses. Any activity that involves moving your body and bonding with others will improve brain neurotransmitter balance. For parents, ensuring separate activities are available for children can give stressed parents a much-needed break from entertaining their little ones. After a traumatic experience, parenting can often feel overwhelming, but guilt may prevent parents from expressing this need. So having childcare available at events can give them an opportunity to care for themselves without adding to their guilt. The main focus is to create a sense of security. Victims need to know that they can rely on the community for activities that will make them feel human again. Furthermore, the Baha'i writings offer comfort to those suffering from PTSD and other mental illnesses. I mentioned before the quote from Shoghi Effendi that reminds sufferers that no matter how severe our mental afflictions, our spirit is healthy, near to our beloved, and will in the next world enjoy a happy and normal state. Baha'u'llah assures us that days of blissful joy, of heavenly delight, are assuredly in store for us. He also states that the healer of all thine ills is remembrance of me. Moreover, Baha'u'llah says, thy name is my healing, oh my God. We can remember God and focus on the names of God through the revealed prayers, particularly the Tablet of Ahmad, the Long Healing Prayer, and the Fire Tablet. These three are particularly powerful in healing both physical and mental conditions. These prayers and words of consolation can alleviate anxiety in those with PTSD. The community should share such writings when appropriate with those overwhelmed with fear post-trauma. These are only some examples of the ways Baha'i communities can help those in the community post-trauma. Each community possesses unique characteristics, strengths, and challenges, and should take these distinct features into account when applying any guidance. Community members should observe how any practices impact the individuals in their community and consult on the results. New discoveries and insights should yield unity, education, upliftment, cooperation, and love. Truth is not just rational, but empirical.
How are you? Good, good.
It must, can someone mute them?
Yes.
It must be demonstrated through productive results in the world. If strategies are not productive for a particular community, that community should release those approaches, even if they are supported by science or have produced results in other communities. In addition, science's understanding of trauma continues to evolve and remains imperfect. Subjectivity is involved in science, even on the most basic observational level. The conclusions of scientific investigations are always more or less probable. They are never absolute proofs. Baha'i communities need to recognize the impossibility of achieving absolute truth and remain flexible in allowing new knowledge and experience to continuously shape their approach to trauma. We all, scientists and non-scientists alike, have biases. Bringing in a variety of perspectives can reduce errors from faulty assumptions. Through flexibility and consultation, communities can develop more effective approaches for combating trauma. Moreover, our involvement in any discourse, including trauma, should be informed by the best available scientific evidence and grounded in spiritual principles. Science frees us from superstition and ignorance and yields the technology and material goods that allow us to investigate and better respond to the challenges of our world. Meanwhile, religion expands our spiritual capacities, guides the morals and ethics of society, and provides the goals towards which science should strive. Abdu'l-Baha compares material civilization, of which science is a part, to a lamp glass, and divine civilization to a lamp. No matter how advanced science is, material civilization cannot provide any light on its own. Material and divine civilization must walk hand in hand. To advance all dimensions of humanity, science and religion must intertwine. However, even with all the science and spiritual wisdom available, it is easy to become caught up in the darkness of our world. Even without trauma or PTSD, Baha'is cannot escape the pernicious influence of our aloof and indifferent world that values money more than human life. In order to heal the ills afflicting humanity, including trauma, we must actively resist this enervating force by drawing on the inspiration of revelation. Baha'u'llah has told us the object of every revelation is to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind. Regularly turning to the vast ocean of wisdom Baha'u'llah has provided will renew our strength and build our resilience, which is essential in acting as a haven for the hopeless. Suffering pervades our existence. Discord and malice are apparent everywhere. At least 70% of the population of our world has been directly impacted by one or more major life traumas. The chronic stress of data-driven environments and competition further erode those in high-income countries of the most needed resource in recovery, social support. Those in mental health fields struggle to fill this gap with various treatments to little avail because a therapist cannot provide the social bonds that we need to heal after a traumatic experience. In addition, many groups and individuals judge victims and worsen their self-blame and guilt. There seems to be little hope in our society for those struggling with the aftermath of trauma to find refuge. In response to Baha'u'llah's call, the Baha'i community has a responsibility to be a lamp unto them that walk in darkness, a joy to the sorrowful, a sea for the thirsty, a haven for the distressed, and a defender of the victim of oppression. In order to yield ever-evolving frameworks for facilitating healing and minimizing the suffering from future traumas, Baha'i communities must provide refuge to victims by negotiating the complexities of trauma, synthesizing the insights of science with the wisdom and inspiration of the Baha'i writings. We must engender the social support that is desperately needed by so many by withholding judgment, providing activities that help to balance neurotransmitters, sharing uplifting words from the writings, and relieving any stress on victims that we can. When seeking to develop a framework for building a refuge for those in need, the community must judge all aspects of the framework by the fruit it yields. As science and our understanding of revelation evolves, so too should our methods for responding to trauma. We must constantly examine the impacts of our framework, update ourselves on new scientific understandings of trauma, consult with other members of the community, and modify our actions accordingly. By integrating the insights of science and religion and maintaining our focus on the needs of the individuals we serve, we can uplift those lost in the darkness of trauma.